it's Henna here, and thanks for coming to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'll be doing a video all about my palettes. This is a really popular palette tag that I've been seeing going around YouTube, and I really wanted to come along and do one myself since I do definitely have a lot of palettes. But before we get into this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Also, go ahead and follow me on Instagram at Thehennaali because I'm always on Instagram if not here on YouTube. And without further ado, you guys, let's get straight into this video. So when I saw this palette tag going around on YouTube, I was like, I have to join in. I definitely do have a lot of palettes that I've been kind of collecting over the years, using and not using. The only thing is I did just recently have a declutter of my makeup, so I definitely had to work with what I had, and I got rid of a lot of stuff that I wish I could have used, but a lot of it was old and expired, so I had to get rid of it. No matter, I'm still gonna do this tag, so let's just go ahead and get straight into this. First one is my newest palette, and that is really easy because I just went ahead and got this recently. This is the Judys Place Nomad palette. So I definitely have heard of Judys Place, but I never really got around to buying it because it was always online only until I just recently realized it's in Ulta. It has been in Ulta for a long time now, but I guess the reason why I didn't know about it is because I don't really go to Ulta as much as I shop from Ulta now. Before, I was always going to Sephora. Duh, crazy me didn't know Judys Place was in Ulta, but I really wanted to go ahead and pick up this palette, and it really is brand new. As you can see, I have the little thing on it. But that is what this palette looks like. It is such a gorgeous color story. I haven't even dipped into it yet, so this is really brand new. Judys Place is a Black-owned beauty brand. I do definitely want to show my support, and if one of those ways is buying products from a Black-owned beauty brand, I definitely want to do that. So if you have any good recommendations, go ahead and let me know in the comments below. Judys Place is one of those that I really wanted to try out. It just was, I thought it was always online only, and I really wanted to see it in person. But when I found out it was at Ulta, I had to pick it up. And this specific palette, the color story, was just calling my name. I could definitely see myself using this on an everyday basis, and especially for Indian makeup. Now I'm going to go to my oldest palette. Now this one, technically, it counts as my oldest palette after doing my declutter, but I definitely had a lot older palettes than this. But again, because I did get rid of a lot of palettes, I decluttered a lot of stuff. This has now become my oldest palette, and that one has to be the Modern Renaissance palette by Anastasia Beverly Hills. And this palette right here was definitely a game changer palette in the beauty space. I remember everybody on YouTube was raving about this palette. I remember when I was trying to get my hands on it, it was sold out everywhere until I went to like a Dillard's, you know, in Florida, and I was like, oh my god, they have it. And I picked it up, and it was like the last one. It was a big thing, but this is definitely has to be my oldest palette. It's definitely been used and loved. It's become one of those where I don't really touch it anymore just because I've had it for such a long time. I don't think it's a really good idea to use it anymore, but I kept this one because this was a really, I think, really great palette, and I just didn't want to get rid of it. So yeah, so my oldest palette has to be the one by ABH. Now I think this one, everyone has a pretty common palette that they use for it. The most affordable or inexpensive palette that I have in my collection are the e.l.f. Bite Size eyeshadow palette, and these are just so amazing. I have two of them actually for the price of $3. Honestly speaking, for the price, I think they're just amazing. $3, and they do such a beautiful job. These are such pretty palettes. Look at these. These are the two that I have. This one is in Truffles, and then this one is Rose Water. I really like these two. I've seen other ones, but I feel like these two really spoke to me, the color stories of these, and I do get a good use out of them, especially this one. I really like this one a lot, the Rose Water. It is so pretty on an everyday use. For $3, they're fantastic. So, because they actually work a lot better than some other palettes that are a little more expensive than this. And for $3, the fact that they work so well, I mean, you can't beat it. Now for the most expensive palette that I have, and I feel like it's, you know, you'll either be hearing about two brands, Pat McGrath or Natasha Denona. The one that I have is by Natasha Denona, and it's the Sunset palette. This is by far the most expensive palette I have in my collection. This is the only Natasha Denona palette I also have, just because I can't justify the price tag for this palette. So here is how my Sunset palette look. It's definitely been used. I've used it a lot. The only thing that I've noticed about this palette, and I'm thinking it's only my palette, for some reason, I don't know if you guys can see there, it's been sweating. And I keep it in the same spot as my other palettes, And do you see how it's sweating? I don't know if that's only a defect in my palette. And you see like the smears and stuff right here. That's not because of me. That's literally because for some reason, ever since I got this palette, it has been sweating oddly, and I don't really get it because I don't really see anyone else having this problem. But if you've seen this and you have this problem, let me know, because I'm a little confused, especially with $125 or $29 price tag. I don't really see why it's doing that. But other than that, this is a really pretty palette. I've used this quite a bit. I definitely told myself when I did the declutter I need to start using this way more, especially since I spent so much on this palette. So yeah, this is my most expensive palette. My palette that has a memory with it, or like most memorable palette, and that has to be the Huda Beauty Original Rose Gold Textured Palette. Reason being, I feel like when this palette came out, it was definitely around the time when the beauty space here on YouTube and social media was really taking off, and it was just such a memorable moment for me, especially when this palette came out. I think that's when I really started to try out different makeup looks, really want to branch out and experiment with my makeup instead of just doing the same thing I always did. A lot of people didn't like this palette because they said that the textures were really, like, you know, the textured shadows were really hard to use because you couldn't use it with a brush. They were mad that they had to use it with the finger. But in my opinion, I really enjoyed this palette just because I don't mind using my fingers. I use my fingers in general, even for normal shadows most of the time. So I really enjoyed this palette. I think this palette really pushed brands to start trying out new things with their eyeshadow palettes. I think because of Huda Beauty with the textured shadows, a lot of brands took note and started incorporating that into a lot of their palettes. But I really enjoyed this palette, and it's still in my collection and it's still used till this day. But this is definitely a really memorable palette for me. So let's get to the most colorful palette, and I have quite a few, but I was like, I think the most colorful one for me has to be this one right here, which is the Be Perfect Cosmetics Carnival XL Pro palette by Stacey Marie. I know she had the original Carnival palette, which I did not get, but when the extra large palette came out, like an extension to that, I had to get this. Here you go, right here. This is what this palette looks like. This is also in the category of the largest palette in my collection. I've definitely used this palette a lot, and I love that it has the 3 highlighters there as well. It has your neutral shadows, your warm shadows, your cool tone shadows, and then it's just extremely colorful. So this is definitely a great one that does get used. Since I was talking about my largest palette in my collection, also I wanted to go ahead and say that the smallest palette in my collection is also those e.l.f. bite-sized eyeshadow palettes. These are the smallest palettes in my collection. Just want to make sure I mention that before I forget. Alright, next category is what palette was worth the hype. And this one was pretty easy for me, and that really is the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette. The campaign photos were just so gorgeous. The color story was so different, and I think the biggest thing about this palette for me is just the packaging is so different for Huda Beauty, and the color story is so different, especially on the market. I think this was definitely a really pretty palette while still being very different. So I was really excited to get my hands on this palette. But this palette, so worth the hype. The formula of her shadows in this palette are so much different than her other eyeshadow palettes. I don't know what it is about this palette. So blendable, so opaque. Even the textured shadows are so easy to apply, and I can even apply a lot of them with a brush. So this palette I think is really worth the hype. It's just all around a great palette. I use it for every day. I've used it for glam looks. It's just such a pretty palette, and I still use it till this day. Now this palette is one that I think that's not worth the hype. I'm giving this the Jaclyn Hill Volume 2 palette. Now, let me just make it very clear. Do I think the palette is gorgeous? Yes. I think the color story of this palette is seriously so pretty. It's so well thought out. However, I don't reach for this palette at all. I've literally only used this palette once. I've concluded one of the reasons why I don't use this palette. A big part of the reason has to do with the size. Now I know I was mentioning that I use the Be Perfect Cosmetic palette, the Carnival one, but that's because I know that's like my go-to rainbow palette and I don't mind using it. I just don't reach for it at all. I've only used it once, and I've only used like the orange shadows. There's something about Morphe palettes that for some reason I never really reach for them. Even her original Jaclyn Hill palette, even though that was such a beautiful palette. I had the original formula one because I know supposedly they changed the formula on the newer ones that they're like getting made now. That one I used it for a while, and then I just completely stopped using it. Do I like other products from Morphe? Yeah, but I don't know. I just think their eyeshadow palettes are a little overplayed at this point, and I'm just you know, but I did really love the color story. I really wanted to buy this palette, but I just never reached for it. Now that leaves me with the last palette, which is my everyday palette. What palette I use every day, almost every day. For the past couple months, I've been really seeing myself, and I know I've been using it even when I travel. And it is the KKW Beauty Classic palette. This palette I have been using. I definitely haven't hit pan on it yet just because it's not really a palette that you have to go really hard in to get the shadow. It's pretty opaque. It's very pretty. But this palette, I've used it so much. I've traveled with this palette. I've traveled with this palette this past summer when I went to the UK. I went to Switzerland, Italy with this palette. This palette has been my go-to. I wear it on an everyday basis. Even in my look today, I have a little bit of this palette on right now. Surprisingly enough, KKW Beauty's palettes are pretty good. They're not the best out there, but they do the job. And this is such a neutral palette. Well, you still have some shadows that you can definitely make for a more glam night out look. They're blendable. They're pretty opaque. The shimmers are really pretty. It's just a nice palette, and the color story is perfect for an everyday. It just works. I like this palette. It works. And the packaging is really nice. It's simple. I love traveling with this palette. And yeah, I mean, I have nothing else to say, but this is a really easy palette to use. I feel like anyone could use this palette. It's great. So yeah. But alright, you guys, that is it for this video. This was my palette tag. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Go ahead and comment down below your answers to these questions. Also, make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, because I do post new videos here every week. Follow me on Instagram at Thehennaali, because I'm always on Instagram. And honestly, you can find me on most all socials at Thehennaali. But without further ado, you guys, I will see you in the next video.